Welcome to everyone. Welcome, my fellow Gray Panthers, Gay Panthers, Straight Panthers, LGBTQ Panthers, to Gray Panthers NYC's June 2026 Transformation Tuesday. Our program today is called Aging with Pride, Building Inclusive Communities. And I'd like to point out that both the Gray Panthers movement and Pride Month trace our roots to the same year, 1970, a remarkable year when people across the country were challenging discrimination and pushing for civil rights, dignity, and inclusion. More than 50 years later, as we're preparing to celebrate July 4th, I'm sorry to say our work is far from finished. At Gray Panthers, we believe that fighting against ageism means standing up against all forms of discrimination and working toward a society where everyone can age with dignity and respect. So for those of you joining us for the first time, it's great to have you. Welcome. I'm Michelle Arnaud, president of the Gray Panthers NYC, which was founded by Maggie Kuhn, whom you just saw in the opening video. Gray Panthers NYC has been hosting free public education webinars on the final Tuesday of every month for the past 5 years. We've covered topics ranging from nursing home reform to caregiving to healthcare to climate change to public policy to Pride Month. We're proud to keep our programs free and open to everyone around the world. And you probably can tell where I'm going with this. Like every small grassroots organization, we have some real costs involved in keeping our conversation going, from the Zoom platform to behind the scenes work. And like all nonprofits, we're feeling the pinch. So if you value our programs, please consider supporting us with a donation. We'll be launching a fundraising campaign, so check your email soon. All our webinars are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, thanks to our amazing communications and digital engagement manager, Emily Trask. Shout out to Emily. We couldn't do this without you. And now it's my honor to introduce our panelists. Bill Gross, Chief Services Officer at SAGE, a leading national organization leading LGBTQ plus older adults. Paul Nagel, Executive Director of the Stonewall Community Development Corporation, working on affirming housing and community for LGBTQ plus elders. And Kate Poppenhagen, a PhD student and teaching assistant at Miami University of Ohio, whose research is focusing on aging and LGBTQ plus identity experience. Our facilitator is Carrie Leljedal, our vice president, and a strong, loud voice in this work. And she will be taking questions after the presentation. So over to you, Carrie.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm thrilled. There's a lot of names and faces I've never seen before, which is very exciting for us. I grew up in a world that I never knew there was anything different. Everybody was accepted, whether they were gay, straight, disabled, Black. It never mattered in my world. I raised my children that way. So belonging to an organization that supports my beliefs so strongly and with such history is amazing, because I live in a very small community that's not always so accepting, but the rest, at least parts of our world are. And we need to teach others every day how we can be more accepting and more loving, because right now, unfortunately, we live in a very mean world that needs a lot of help. I'm honored to have our guests here today and to end Pride Month on a high note for everyone. So we're going to start with Paul and let him tell us about. Nope, sorry. We're going to start with Bill. I'm sorry. I even have it in front of me in the right order. With Bill Gross from SAGE, and then we'll go to Paul. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks so much, Carrie. And I'm excited to be here with you all one day after New York City Pride, or no, that was 2 days ago, I guess. Just to talk a little bit to get this conversation going. And specifically what I'm going to talk about today is what makes populations of LGBTQ plus older adults now different than the general population in terms of their needs. But first of all, I want to just introduce myself. I'm Bill Gross. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Chief Services Officer at SAGE. For those of you who don't know, SAGE is the nation's largest and oldest organization in the world, actually, dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTQ plus older adults. So we primarily serve lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer adults over the age of 60. Although some of our services start at age 50 for populations such as the trans population, such as people living with HIV, and such as veterans, all of which are underserved populations in middle age. So SAGE lowered our age for those populations. We start services there for them. We are headquartered in New York City, but we've, over these almost 50 years now, become an increasingly national organization. So one thing I'll do kind of at the end of when I speak is to talk about what some of those services are, just in case you or people you love are interested in finding out about more of what kind of supports and connections are out there. So although, as I said, I will be starting talking about kind of what makes these populations different, I want to start by talking about what the similarities are. I'm a social worker. As part of my job at Sage, when I got this, I've been working at Sage for 12 years. And when I got this particular position, I said I'd love to take it, but only if I can continue working one-on-one with participants as part of it. I didn't want to just be behind a desk all day long. So because of that, I have a small caseload at Sage of people who I see, therapy clients who I see once a week. I also run support groups here at Sage, including what has become the nation's longest running HIV support group for older adults. Not just under me, this started in the 80s. And I can attest to the fact that when I speak to many of our participants who come in for counseling, it's about issues that are similar to most older adults. It might be specifically, for instance, about just aging and support around the aging process, whether that be anticipated changes, fears about potential changes in one's body or in one's life. It might be questions around self-identity as an aging person. I really like that video starting out. And because we live in a society that is unfortunately inherently ageist still, sometimes navigating that kind of ageism soup requires some support. Another thing I talk a lot with people about, I don't know if any of you have heard of Erik Erikson. He was a psychoanalyst in the 20th century. And one of the things he's known for is a theory on psychosocial development of human beings in general throughout the life cycle. So, when one's as an infant, as an adolescent, each stage. And one thing he talks about a lot, which I really identify in my work with my participants, is in the later stage, in older adulthood, many older adults go through what's called a life review. I'm not sure if any of you can identify with this, but it's an increased time of thinking of one's life, thinking of one's past. Things start coming up about, oh, that time when I was 20 years old and that happened, right? And it's a really natural way of reflecting on the past to kind of reconcile regrets, maybe, integrate different experiences in the life cycle, and maybe find an overall meaning for one's life. So that can be really helpful for people in therapy to just talk through those experiences. Additional conversations about caregiving for a loved one, about bereavement, about support finding new interests or new relationships. Lots of conversations about sex and what sex and intimacy are like as we age. So all those things that make us similar, right? But I do want to talk a little bit about what makes some people in these generations different, because it informs then why a place like Sage exists, right? Because otherwise, anyone would just go up to the friendly neighborhood senior center around the corner and feel comfortable. So let's talk about those things. And I have a short PowerPoint. It is short, I promise you. Hold on a sec. There we go. All right, that should do it. So LGBTQ plus aging. First of all, just some numbers. LGBTQ plus older adults are a growing population. They're growing because of the aging of the baby boomers. They're growing because more people are coming out at a later age. And there are differences. So the two I'm going to talk about are around family structure as it relates to caregiving, right? And about the impact of discrimination. And not just discrimination from the person next door, but from the from the institutions that are historically supposed to be there to protect and serve us, right? We'll talk about that in a second. But first, a conversation about caregiving and family structure. So anyone here in the audience who is aging themselves can probably appreciate these three elements, which make a difference as one age, right? Whether you're single, whether or not you have children, and whether or not you live alone. And specifically from a caregiving model, what that makes us look like, right? So here's the general population. 40% are single, 20% have no children, 33% live alone. And here's the LGBTQ plus population. And again, there is nothing wrong with these numbers. I'm talking about it more as how it then impacts us as we age and maybe need more care. The general population, we kind of operate in this vertical caregiving model where very often there's a younger adult in the picture, maybe not even in the same state, but they may be kind of there checking in, at least via phone, on how we're doing, on how our medical care is, right? And very often in these generations of older adults, we operate more on a horizontal caregiving model, where the caregivers in our life are our peers. Very often at Sage, when we ask someone for an emergency contact, the person they give is the person who lives in the apartment down the hall, right? Who's also maybe 70, 80, 90 years old. And once again, nothing wrong with this kind of caregiving model. It's how I think many LGBTQ plus folks got through the 80s and 90s in HIV, depending on one's friends, depending on one's peers. But as we age, if our caregivers are also aging, it can cause some challenges, right? And then also, yes, doormen for support, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the person you perhaps see every day. And then there's this thing about discrimination. And again, as I said, discrimination not just from individuals, but from institutions. And here's what I mean. When we look at these kind of big six, and there's more than just these six, we often think of these as the institutions that are there to protect and serve us, especially when we're at our most vulnerable, right? That there are things that are inherent to these institutions that are supposed to keep us safe, and there's an equitability about them. What we know is that for many people of the generations of older adults right now who are LGBTQ plus, that is not the case. That has not been the case throughout one's history. And then in fact, these institutions have systemically oppressed many people of these generations. And when we're looking at impact, let's just look at one thing here, when in that top right-hand corner, which is the medical establishment. So homosexuality for several decades was treated as a mental illness and was listed as such in what's called the DSM, which is what psychiatrists, doctors, social workers, and others, pharmaceutical companies sometimes look at in terms of a list of mental illnesses. And so finally, in 1973, 1993, homosexuality was removed from the DSM. It was no longer a mental illness to the psychiatric community. But for many of her folks, I mean, 1973 sounds like a long time away, but for a woman in her 90s, that means that for most of the first half of her life, when she went to her doctor, when she went to her therapist, she was perhaps seen as having a mental illness. And how is that going to impact the way that she seeks medical care today? How is that going to impact the way that an older adult talks about partners or sex with their doctors or with their therapist? So these are some of the reasons why SAGE is important, because we can mitigate these factors for a lot of the folks that we work with. As I said, we're the oldest and the largest of our kind, actually in the world. Here in New York City, we based out of senior centers. There are 4 SAGE centers. I know not everyone on this call is from New York City, so I'll be talking about outside of New York City as well. But in New York City, we have these 4 SAGE centers, and that offer all sorts of services, daily meals, counseling, health education, fitness, arts and culture. It's very much like your standard senior center, except there's more drag, more fabulous programming, right? Probably more karaoke and Broadway nights, I would hazard to guess. So it's pretty wonderful here at Sage. Our management, we work with these special programs, such as programs for people who are veterans, who are living with HIV, who are trans. Our friendly visitor program is a home-based visiting program where a volunteer is set up with an older adult and visits once a week for about an hour or so. And then we have national programs. I've listed one of them here, and this is one of our newest endeavors. Sage U, YOU, is basically a national senior center where anyone can go. If you aren't LGBTQ plus, it's okay. We don't card you at the door. And we invite you. There are events, there are support groups, there are there's something called a Lavender Lounge, which is an intergenerational event where people just hang out and talk. Um, Lots of resources for people as they age, lots of opportunities for support and community. And I just happened to see, if there's been other questions, feel free to ask them in a second. But I just happened to see that last post that yes, part of our national programming, besides something like SageU, is our advocacy program. And that is where we seek to change policies on a federal, state, and local level. So we work with elected officials. We work to change the Older Americans Act. We hope to maintain protections for LGBTQ plus older adults, and are really working throughout the United States to ensure that LGBTQ plus elders are afforded the rights and that they deserve. Um, so we have a lot of stuff that my other panelists are going to be talking about in a couple of minutes. But this was just a start to kind of talking about the groundwork of some of the needs and the specific needs of these communities. And I will we'll have plenty of time for questions, but I'll pass it on to Paul.
Okay, good. Hi, I'm Paul Nagel. I'm the Executive Director of Stonewall Community Development Corporation. Our mission is to see LGBTQ older adults in safe, welcoming housing they can afford with access to health and mental health services that meet their unique needs. We operate in a couple of different arenas. We help people facing evictions. We help people find apartments. We help people with vouchers, find brokers. We have services to help people age in place longer. But I'm going to focus today on a new program that we're trying to launch called the Stonewall Bridge. This is very laser focused on housing and home care. And I'm going to pull up a little. Hold on a second. Screen share. Sorry, I am an older adult and I am technically challenged at this point. Hold on.
It's okay, a lot of us are.
Yeah, yeah. There we go. Okay, so one of the issues of trying to create LGBTQ senior housing is it's against the law. Um, it's against the Fair Housing Act. Since the discrimination against us is not recognized, we're not allowed to take steps to mitigate it. So we've been working on a strategy to create housing without taking federal money. No, is there a way to, yeah, there we go. And we've been working on this for 4 years. It's called the Stonewall Bridge, and it is a universal model. It is being piloted in the LGBTQ community, but it is applicable to any community that has cultural affinity. And the idea is that we have, for the LGBTQ community, we have an older adult community with a lived history of discrimination, fighting discrimination and winning. We also have a history of creating networks of care and support for ourselves when abandoned by the government and the medical establishment. And then we have a bunch of older adults with appreciated real estate, no one to caregive for them, that not having natural heritors or caregivers. So the idea is to train LGBTQ millennials and Gen Xers who have no career paths or paths to equity to be awesome home care attendants, and then to create a system where folks can receive appropriate care, donate their home when they pass, live on an annuity until then, knowing that when they pass, their home is going into a community property portfolio that will be owned and operated by the community with embedded care nodes already in there with these caregivers living in these properties. So we started, as we always do when we're trying to build a program, with a survey to find out if what we're doing is actually what people need. And the results are really interesting. We just hit 450 respondents about 3 months ago. But look at this. I have specific concrete plans, not so much. I feel quite secure we'll be there to take care of me. 450 respondents. Only 15% feel secure that someone will be there to take care of them. This is, I think, 296 LGBTQ and the rest are straight. So this is not just an LGBTQ issue. It's a kind of a modern family issue. I would consider using the value of my home to ensure care. 75% agree. That was very encouraging to us. I would be open to having a younger person living with me to assist me if it meant I could stay in my home. 82% of respondents agreed to that. So I talked a little bit about what the model is. And then in terms of how we operate, it's affordable housing, aging in place, and inclusive healthcare. And these are our different programs. Community Properties Portfolio is the real estate component of it. The Stonewall Bridge is the long-term care component of it. We do placement services and creation with a couple of different programs that we have, working with brokers and developers. And then Stonewall Village NYC, which is an online community that offers the resources and guidance and some activities to solo agers to be able to stay in their homes successfully by themselves. And so I would encourage everyone to go to our website and look at our other programs. I will put that link in the chat. But in terms of who benefits from this, so older adult homeowners who can age in place, receive respectful care, and leave a legacy. Current older adult renters who can contract tenant-based services from the team of local caregivers. So the idea is that one person with a home would house a caregiver, but other people without the real estate to throw into that mix would have access to that caregiver for contracted tasks. Future older adult renters, because we're creating a portfolio of affordable in perpetuity properties. the millennial and Gen X LGBTQ community members with the job training program. And part of the concept of this also is that so the sharegiver, we call them, gets room and board, a stipend or salary, and then if they stay with us long enough and serve well, they can vest shares in the equity that the growing community property portfolio is generating and build equity for themselves. So it's kind of a 360 community development project. So for the community, we're removing housing stock from the private market, building housing stock that's owned and operated by the community, that whose equity is going to the community. And then for tax and estate planning attorneys, we'll be working with them to create an educated and activated group of clients. And then taxpayers, the housing program is designed to require minimal public funds, but also people aging in place successfully tend to go to emergency rooms and nursing homes a lot less, which is also really good for the taxpayers. And for the general population, that this can be replicated in any community. So I wanted to give that baseline, and then hopefully people will have questions when we're ready for them. Kate?
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Carrie and Michelle, for having me today. I'm really excited. My name is Kate Poppenhagen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a PhD student here at Miami University studying social gerontology, and my specific research is on religiosity and spirituality for LGBTQ older adults. I'm particularly interested in identity integration and also the experience of LGBTQ identity as a form of spirituality. I'm not presenting on that today, but it certainly has an undertone to community building, to service-oriented work, and to this idea that we can continue to connect to our legacy and history through volunteerism, through showing up and creating community for one another. And so I'm going to zoom us out. We kind of started with Bill on the individual and the person, certainly embedded in ideologies and structures as he talked about. We moved on to Paul, who was looking at more of boots on the ground grassroots effort with community building. And then I'm going to actually talk about the work that I did here, I'm in Ohio, with Cincinnati Pride to make Pride more inclusive and accessible to LGBTQ older adults, but also LGBTQ folks of all ages who live with disabilities. Because I don't feel like they're always included in conversations. And so I'm really, really excited to kind of share with you the work that I did over the past year to make Pride more inclusive. Just a fun fact about me, I am part of this queer pep band. This is us pictured with the mayor. This past weekend, I play sousaphone. We're called the Awkward Segways. It's also a fun kind of nod to bear culture. But we have this bear. It's a whole story. But what's really cool about our group as kind of a side thing is we show up to charity walks, we play at nursing homes, and it's all about us bringing visibility to LGBTQ folks in places that we might not think about it. So we've done the Buddy Walk, which is a charity walk for folks who are living with Down syndrome. We've done the Alzheimer's Association walk. We're trying to get into the breast cancer walk this year. And so it's really, again, this idea of using culture and music and creativity to continue to create community. And so as I was invited into Cincinnati Pride, it's a volunteer organization to help with the Pride Planning Festival, doing accommodations more so than anything is about creativity. It's about an openness to seeing the world and our environment and the way in which we have come to do things in new and exciting ways. And I think creativity is really something that we all can harness to fight ableism, to fight ageism, homophobia, all of the isms. Really, creativity, art, and music, for me personally, are kind of at the soul of it. And again, that taps into that spirituality aspect. So a couple of things that I helped out with Pride. We had a senior zone. So Cincinnati Pride takes place in a very large park that butts up right against the Ohio River, at the border of where Ohio meets Kentucky. So my friend started the Cincinnati LGBTQ Aging Council, and a thread that you'll see in kind of this planning committee is that we always brought people in from the community to help us kind of say, like, what do you want? How can we make this work? And so the Aging Council met monthly and then a little bit more frequently as the festival got closer. But we kind of just asked, like, what do you want in a senior zone? What do you want it to be called, the senior zone? Do you want it to call it something else? In the past, they had used couches. So some of the feedback we got was that couches were really difficult to get up from. So we changed the chairs that we offered. We heard from folks that they wanted resources, but not just kind of social service resources, also resources about what is it like to come out later in life? Where are support groups? Where are groups that I can get together and socialize? And so we put a call out, invited people together, and then our senior zone was really kind of, it was embedded within the festival, but it was also kind of in its own little alcove. And so it was a huge hit. We had folks who were coming, eventually calling it the senior center. So they kind of, even in the midst of Pride, took it and ran with it and made it kind of their own space. We also had a sensory refresh zone. So here was kind of where we started to merge both aging and then disability, but certainly anyone could come to the sensory refresh zone. We brought in fans. As you can see over here, we had a tent with a swamp cooler, which I found in Ohio. It's not called that. It's what we call it in Colorado, but it's basically a fan that sucks up water, cools down an area. So we had a tent with walls. We had these really nice chairs. And then we offered a bunch of different sort of sensory deprivation, cooling towels, fans. We had earplugs, ice packs. And so this was, again, kind of off from the main festival, but it was just an area people could come to just relax. And so it was much less busy, but it was still a place for people to connect. We had a bunch of like fidget spinners, rubber worry stones. And so people could just come, hang out, calm down, but still build community. They were still embedded within the festival. Excuse me. And then the other kind of thing that we did this year were created these accessibility hubs. And there were 3 throughout the festival. And in the accessibility hub, we offered some sensory items. We had these very large maps, and then we had circled and noted where specific accessibility features were. So one of the really cool things that we did was we bring in something called the Momentum Refresh Bus. And that is a bus that has an adult-sized changing table, completely accessible for folks who use wheelchairs. It's just this really nice air-conditioned bus. We also had sign language interpreters. So if folks needed assistance in terms of getting help with sign language, we had someone who was able to do that. The accessibility hubs also had fans. And so again, we were just trying to create these little islands of reprieve from the heat. Although we were incredibly lucky this year, it was very overcast, it was humid, but it was not the kind of heat that we have happening right now. And so those are kind of the features that we added to Pride this year. But the work that I did, the big project that I helped with, was the development of reasonable accommodations. And so I feel incredibly humbled and honored to have been invited into the LGBTQ disability community here in Cincinnati. And I've been able to attend these disability community support group meetings where I'm able to go in and connect with people from the community and kind of hear about their experience with Pride, but their experience in general. We've also had incredible conversations about what it's like to be young and living with a disability, and all of your services are lumped in with aging services through things like the ADRC. And so I'm kind of coming to understand like different tensions and fissures within the LGBTQ community for younger folks who live with disabilities, for older folks who live with disabilities, and then for older folks who are just receiving services in these same areas. We've also just had really incredible conversations about representation and what it's like to show up somewhere. And so somebody shared a story about visiting New York recently. There is a fashion exhibition, I think at the Guggenheim, but all of the mannequins involved in it have different bodies. And one of the mannequins that was created is sitting in a wheelchair. And so somebody was talking about this profound experience they had of being in a wheelchair across from a mannequin who's seated in a wheelchair and kind of seeing themselves represented in that way. And so my last slide is about lessons learned, and we're going to kind of return to that idea of accessibility and visibility. But for the reasonable accommodations, it was a Google form that I developed with this group, and then we pilot tested it with the community. And so we sent out QR codes and we just said, click through, what do you think? Do you have any other suggestions? And then we made it go live so that we were able to see if anyone would accommodate. We have a lot of work to do with the accommodation request form. But I really hope today that I can kind of come and show up here and let you all know that if you have the drive, if you have, a North Star of accessibility and inclusion, that those are really the most important things that you can have when you start entering this work, because it is so incredibly difficult. And there is a lot of red tape. And it's not only with trying to navigate legislation and rules and regulations, it's constantly about trying to figure out how to address ableism within the LGBTQ community. Because for me, one of the biggest takeaways I got from this work over this last year is that we have a lot of healing and a lot of dialogue that needs to happen within our community for us to be able to be truly inclusive. And so some of the lessons that I learned, don't make decisions for others, which probably sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but the problem is that all of a sudden you're starting to engage in work, you're starting to ask people, especially for reasonable accommodations, about like, what does this look like to bring to fruition? And when you start logically thinking about implementing things like a sensory refresh zone, and you're thinking about, well, what items should we bring in? Those are questions that really need to go back out to the community. And one of the great things that I've learned is just providing people with enough information for them to make the decisions for themselves. And so this is why these dialogues need to happen. This is why rapport and trust needs to be built, because sometimes it feels like we're talking at each other and we're never really showing each other that we're both kind of working toward the same goal of inclusion and equitability. The second point really goes back to the story I was telling before about this moment of being in an art exhibition and seeing oneself represented, but accessibility goes beyond the built environment. It's not just about, did we get rid of stairs? Like, I think when we think about disability as a social construct, it's easy to say like, well, if there weren't stairs, then people wouldn't be disabled. But it feels like we made Pride accessible so that people could access ableist culture. And that was there was this moment I had when somebody was talking about doing an arts and craft event. And I said, how are you reaching vendors who are living with disabilities? And they said, well, I didn't think about that. And it's like, why are we inviting people with disabilities to just consume able-bodied culture? And so it's really about accessibility goes beyond that in that built environment, and it's inclusion in the culture. It's visibility in the culture. And I think showing up and being able to say like our culture is now inclusive is another way that we can kind of start to build rapport and mend as well. And then this last thing is something that my friend and incredible advocate says all the time, but they say, leave a space more accessible than you found it. And so if you're excited about this work, or you're nervous, or you've tried and it hasn't gone well, set this as your bar line. And so, the needle of progress moves slowly, but we moved it a little bit this year, and we really, really celebrated that. So thank you all so much for listening, and thanks everyone for this panel. I'm really excited.
So I can't be any more proud of my dear friend Kate. As most people know, I have an adult child who is disabled, who Kate has had the honor to meet and spend time with, and understands that the accessibility is an issue for everyone that is disabled, and to bring it in and making sure people in the LGBTQ community have that accessibility while they're at their event is so important. I took my son to a pride parade a year or two ago where we lived, and it was very difficult to get him into like where the drag show was and all that because of the accessibilities. So, and it is, like Kate said, not just talking about it, but inclusion and including them in the conversation. And my husband recently has reminded me that as advocates, we sometimes forget that we're supposed to let other people speak. And, we have a bad habit of speaking for others because that's what we do. So there's so much to learn from what everybody has said today. The whole concept, especially, Paul, of your space and, how you're looking at building for and making sure people have places to age in space and have people to help support them. This concept of what you were talking about is absolutely incredible. And I would love to see more people understand what you're doing and learn about it. Paul, I'm not sure where you're at, why I don't see you on my screen for some reason. Okay, let's
My
see. Yeah, there
video's
you are.
on.
Okay, I see you now. So, I mean, so you mentioned that, building housing or setting housing just for you, for the community is actually illegal. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, it's the Fair Housing Act. Doesn't include sexual orientation as a protected class or a suspect class, it's actually called. I actually was working with Dio at Sage when they were putting up the Brooklyn House, which was a special deal because it was a NYCHA property, and they have what it means is if you build with public money, you are subject to that jurisdiction's lottery, basically. NYCHA was special because it was a 3-day lottery with a limited number of people, so you could actually front load it, but it's almost impossible to do it any other way. And they, I mean, when Dio was going through it, they wouldn't even let them put rainbows in the advertisements and stuff. And they really were like, you cannot just put LGBTQ folks in here. So part of the idea was, how do we do this on private contracts and not take public money? And the idea is not to only serve gay people, because if you go to the Stonewall Bridge survey, you'll see people don't want to live in a ghetto of only gay folks, and they don't want to live in a ghetto of only older folks. If I can put in a pitch, I put in 3 web addresses. The last one is the Stonewall Bridge survey, and I urge everyone to go and take it. It's like 40 questions, and it will really get you thinking about how prepared you are or not for what you think is coming. And I guarantee you'll learn something about yourself, and you'll help us immensely. So if you can grab that link, snag that link, and take that survey, that would be really great.
Emily, would you make sure to share that in the next day or two online for
Sure.
us?
Yep, will do.
Yeah, and Paul, I have a group of people that I'm going to share to, and I'm going to hopefully set up a meeting because you work along lines of things that I'm also currently working on. And that's, a big part of what we do with Gray Panthers is how can we connect each other to make sure that everybody has the support they need. Nobody wants to age alone. They want to have a support system. They need to have a support system. And you want to make sure that whoever is in that world with you are people you want and people you care about as much as you do. the nicest thing about what you were saying is when Maggie Kuhn started all of this, she would, everything was about intergenerational relationships and having olders and youngers live together and care for each other. And that is so important for people to learn that we need to mix our generations.
Yeah, and there's two things that are particularly relevant about that today. One is that there's this great wealth transfer happening with heterosexual families. It's $70 trillion passing from the boomers to their kids. And there's no mechanism for that to occur in the LGBTQ community. So part of the idea was to give the LGBTQ community access to that phenomenon. And then the other thing is that if there isn't more intergenerational work, there are hostile forces actively trying to erase our history. And so word of mouth and interpersonal relationships is going to become a really important way to maintain our culture.
Oh, absolutely. It it really does trace back to our beginnings. I did a while back, I did a bunch of interviewing with people that had known Maggie over the years. And I guess one of her comments that she would love to make to a crowd, because she loved shock value, was telling women, if you are not happy try with your man, just try another woman. And this was back in the early 70s from this sweet little gray-haired old woman who liked to shock people by what she said and how she said it. And there's a lot of benefit to that today. And I think if we all learn to speak out and learn more, I didn't learn about SAGE until I started doing stuff in the elder care space. And I just thought it was one of the most amazing things I ever learned, because I grew up in a world where it was inclusive. So to learn, we have to be more inclusive. And Kate's part of this, even of bringing the disability awareness into the LGBTQ, is even bigger. Because I can tell you, accessibility does not exist, and especially in New York. It is the least, most accessible city I've ever been to.
I would say also, Carrie, that when it comes to the intergenerational question, one of our SAGE's largest intergenerational program is our Friendly Visitor Program, which was started at the beginning of our agency, started in 1978, based on this model of a volunteer going into a person's home that had been around for about 100 years before that. But SAGE used it for the first time with LGBTQ plus elders. And when I first came to SAGE 12 years ago, that's the program that I ran. And I would find most of our volunteers that came to us were in their 20s and 30s at the time, which I always found was extraordinary. And there are two main reasons for coming, were one, either a connection to older adults in their life thus far, maybe a grandparent, or the lack of connection and wishing that they had that connection when they were growing up. And then the second part, though, amongst, I would say, at least half of the volunteers that would come to us would be, and this is back in 2014, so this is pre kind of modern political time, very modern political times, if you catch my drift. And it was people saying, this is a form of activism for me, and I am doing this to pay back the generations who have come before me, and because I realize that older adults are devalued in this society, and I want to make sure to do this as an expression of activism.
Oh, I absolutely. Michelle, you look like you want to say something. You're muted, sweetheart. Michelle, you're muted. Emily, she said she can't unmute herself for
Okay,
some reason.
I just got
Okay.
sorry, somehow I was muted. That's the problem with ageism, right? We're all muted. Anyway, I wanted to just mention more about, what do you guys all think that we can do intergenerationally to move the needle here? Here we are. We we've got a good group here. Can we do something to motivate everybody on the call to do one thing? Is there anything that you can think of?
I would say just start having conversations, and it's okay if they're hard and awkward. But I facilitate a lot of intergenerational dialogue conversations around religion and spirituality and just being intergenerational LGBTQ. And I started with I think GLAAD's cultural sensitivity, and it's things like don't yuck my yum, what we say in this group stays in this group. But it's also about like we're going to talk about things differently. And so I think like moving forward, understanding that like there are conversations that we need to have in the community about it's different and things change and we use different terms. And so I encourage everyone to just start with grace for themselves and others and having the courage to have those tough conversations.
Because ageism can happen both ways, right? And to some degree, there's a suspicion of people who are much younger than us, perhaps, as well. And just acknowledging that, and as Kate said, what can be initially an uncomfortable conversation or requires a little bit of courage to make that connection. And yeah, I totally agree with Kate.
Hey, Jack, you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on and join us.
Yeah, I'm sitting on the sofa, so you see my halo. But I wanted to, in response to Michelle's question, and also building on Kate's suggestion, and also the concept of friendly visiting as an intergenerational opportunity, one of the things that is about building or addressing ageism, it's twofold. One is about education, and the second is about familiarity. Education about older people and older people reflecting back to younger people. And then on the familiarity is just hanging out with the others. And one thing that is kind of a Grey Pantherish opportunity is to focus on when there are activist opportunities, whether it be No Kings or anything on the street that is visibility, that Grey Panthers have some sort of a intergenerational contingent that gives the world an opportunity to see younger people and older people together doing something of significance. So that's my concept, my suggestion.
Thank you, Jack. Shell, go ahead. Oops, you're muted. Emily, can you unmute him, please?
Sorry, who?
I want to welcome Shel Horowitz. He knew Maggie Kuhn. So
yeah.
I guess he wants to tell us something about her.
Yeah.
I just asked you to unmute Shell.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. I would just responding to Jack that when I've been to No Kings events, I don't see the Grey Panthers. In fact, it's nationally a very low profile. The New York chapter is easy to find online. And after I reached out to Michelle a few weeks ago, she connected me with two other people around the country. But I was an organizer for the Grey Panthers as a Vista volunteer in my 20s. And their motto was and still is, I believe, age and youth in action.
Correct.
So Third Act is out there at the No Kings Days. We're not. They're also attracting a very similar demographic to what the Grey Panthers used to get, older activists. And I'm writing a book for older activists, which is why I reached out to Michelle. And I think it's many of the issues that particularly Kate talked about today in terms of disability access apply, yes, to LGBT folks, but also to aging folks in general. I know in like Immigration Justice Group, for example, the people who are turning 80 or have turned 80 need more accommodations than those of us who are not yet 70.
Well, just
Thank
to
you.
answer you, Shell, we are out there in the No Kings, but look how many of us there are. There are not, there are just fewer of us. So please, everybody, when we march, let's proudly put on a gray ribbon. That's the way that we can identify ourselves as Gray Panthers. So we're doing our best to keep the brand going, the fight.
And
Go
I
ahead.
mentioned earlier to Paul and to Bill, and we'll extend it to the rest of you. We are always looking for people to join us to become part of our advisory board or be an advisor or possibly join our board or one of or our working group. We are very small. We are mighty, but we are small. And very few of us are actually in New York. So where you live makes no difference to us because I live 25 miles from St. Louis and Michelle's in Massachusetts at the moment. Jackson, New York. We have a few people in New York, but there's a lot of us that aren't. So please, if you have, the desire to join us and have an idea, please share it with us because we're always looking for more people, more ideas, and anybody else to help.
To help carry the banner.
Yeah.
So, are there any final words from our panelists? And we'll put all of your websites on our website, all the resources so that people can access. And I think we should all be taking that survey, Paul.
Thank you.
And share
Recently,
the survey, please.
I was actually recently at an event for older adults in Manhattan, and it seemed that all the people who were there, who are the social workers who are helping, don't have a plan for their own future. So I found that a little bit ironic, and so time for all of us to reflect on our own futures.
Yeah, it's really important to plan early, especially these days. Don't wait till you're in crisis. And once you've had a dementia diagnosis, your will is very easy to challenge.
Mm.
So we're really encouraging people to start planning when they're 45. Get on it because if you wait too long, and there are a lot of will challenges going on right now, and there will be more and more, especially for the LGBTQ community. Families tend to swoop in, and if you've had a dementia diagnosis, you're at risk.
That's something to be very careful about. So I guess we're at the end of the hour. So I want to thank everybody for a very thoughtful, powerful hour, a very important conversation during Pride Month as we are approaching the 250th anniversary of our country, which we hope will continue to 300. And so a special thank you to everybody, to our panelists, to Carrie for guiding the discussion. We appreciate everyone for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next month, July 28th, when we're going to be hosting Dr. Roseanne Leipzig, the author of Honest Aging. So let's all age healthily through this next month, and I'll see you in July. Thank you.
Thank you.